going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Only Podcast. This is Chris Vanini. I'm your host, and I'm joined by former TheOnlyColors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey, who, first I would like to apologize, Joe, for talking over you way too much in the last podcast a couple weeks ago. Had a couple of people complain about that. I apologized during the podcast last year, but I wanted to get that out there again. Sometimes I get so antsy to talk that kind of talked over you a little bit. So how you doing on this Wednesday evening that we're recording right now? What's going on?
I'm doing well. I'm drinking a Bell's Oatsmobile, I don't know. It didn't bother me a couple weeks ago at all. I'm not. I am in no way offended, so be all right.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about right now. The big topic, Connor Cook and the draft and all that. I have some thoughts on that, but we're gonna hold off on that to the end because we got a little bit of breaking news today on Wednesday, and we'll start off with basketball because UNLV big man Ben Carter announced that he is transferring to Michigan State, a graduate transfer, meaning he will be immediately eligible. He is he's listed at 6'9", 225. He'll provide more than anything some depth for the front court, which was needed, which we've talked about the last few podcasts. I think I said I would have been surprised if he chose MSU because I didn't know how much playing time he would get, but he said he liked MSU. He provides some needed experience depth down there. I guess, Joe, what was your initial reactions when the news came down today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a particularly big Ben Carter fan, just based on the tempo free stats that he was putting up at UNLV. He was not a particularly good defensive rebounder, but the upside is basically that all of the interior players for next year's MSU team have something to prove one way or another. With Gavin Schilling, it's can he take another step forward? With Nick Ward, it's how much can he really play as a freshman? And then now with Clark, it's I always have Clark on the mind. It's with Carter, it's can he rebound the ball defensively in a way that would make him playable for Izzo. The good news though is that when there's three different guys that might take the leap that they would need to take, there's a better chance of that happening than if there are only one or two guys that you were kind of counting on. So yeah, a spreading risk is a good thing. But other than that, yeah, I mean, he's a big body, and that's about all you can say.
Yeah, he's a pretty good offensive rebounder and decent at blocking shots. A big question, though, is if he'll be healthy in time because he tore his ACL to end his season. And he told the Free Press that he hopes to be 100% by mid-September, early October. So that will kind of push up right to the start of the season. You don't know how much time he'll get in the gym, maybe with the other guys to get any sort of chemistry going there. Not a big score, 8.6 points, 6 rebounds, played 24 minutes a game. But more than anything is he's a body because it's Gavin Schilling, it's Kenny Goins, it's freshman Nick Ward, and that's just about it. You got 6'6" Miles Bridges in there too, freshman. So I think it's a pretty big pickup just because they needed a body in there. I don't think he'll be a big contributor, but just kind of taking up some space, taking up some minutes is something I think they needed because there's plenty of talent on the wings and the guards, but they needed some more bodies in there to just to do what Izzo wants to do in terms of not maybe playing too small.
Yeah, and he's got 5 fouls too.
Yeah, and we know, and that's especially important when you look at the foul rate over Gavin Schilling's career, which has always been a problem. He is always in foul trouble, so that's even bigger there too.
Yeah, and I've wondered for a long time if Kenny Goins would be able to play any time really at the 5. I think we'll find out this year a little bit because if he can defend some opposing centers, I think that would be a pretty huge advantage in some ways because he's got a little bit of length. He's not a fantastic player on the offensive end yet, but we did see Goins flash the ability to shoot a jumper here and there, and he didn't turn the ball over a whole bunch either. So there's some indications that Goins could be potentially a larger offensive contributor next year. If he could play some center, that would really be helpful. He might have to one way or another.
Yeah, and I think it was a couple weeks ago we said we wouldn't talk about anymore about basketball unless something happened, and something did happen. So we've got that there. And actually, was there anything else on Carter you wanted to add? There's, like we said, there's not a whole lot. He's not like a star player like a Brandon Wood or even a Bryn Forbes coming in. He's generally a big body who's not going to be asked to do too much. Is I guess how I would sum him up.
Yeah, what's interesting about roster construction going forward is that you've got Carter on the team this year, but then after the 16-17 season, both he and Gavin Schilling will be gone. Yep. So it's going to be interesting to see how Nick Ward progresses and what the 2017 class looks like for big men, because it could be a pretty thin front court in 17-18 as well. So it's going to be kind of a weird thing to see. I was hoping that they would pick up a regular 2016 recruit, but it seems like that wasn't in the cards, and it's going to be an interesting interior lineup for the next, actually, probably couple years, unless Nick Ward turns out to be a big star or something.
Yeah, it next year was always going to look even more thin because, like I said, Schilling is gone, and you never know how any of the freshmen turn out to look. But at least to have a body for this year, I think is good. But it keeps them open to recruit big, heavy in this next recruiting class. The other big basketball news: Keith Appling arrested on some weapons charges. Carrying concealed weapons, some other crimes at a suburban, I think in Dearborn, at a Dearborn strip club. He was charged today, I believe, and just kind of a sad situation, I guess, is how I would sum it up. My thoughts. He's been playing in the D League and had a little bit of NBA stints this year, but he's a guy who's come from a tough background, and you always hope those guys can get out and make something, but difficult to see Appling dealing with that. It's also a very serious charge. I don't know the circumstances behind everything. We'll find that out as things go along, but you're familiar with Dearborn, Joe. Did you have any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, there's a number of things. The first thing is, I wonder what would have happened with Appling's career if not for the wrist injuries, right? I mean, he was shooting, when he was playing the off-guard spot as a freshman, he was shooting right around 40% from three, and he got asked to kind of move to point guard and took on that responsibility, and at times was absolutely terrific. I mean, that one game against Kentucky in the Champions Classic, right when Champions Classic was really becoming a thing, was very impressive. But he was so inconsistent with the shot, and it just makes me wonder, what his career would have looked like without those wrist injuries. But as for this particular thing, what's kind of weird about it is, so I grew up actually in East Dearborn, where that Pantheon Club is, where he got arrested. It's odd to me for a couple reasons. Number one is East Dearborn has a really high concentration of Muslims. So there aren't a lot of bars in East Dearborn. I think that's like one of the few places where you could actually even drink in East Dearborn, because there's just not a lot of demand. And what's even weirder about that is it's apparently has the fourth highest hard liquor sales in the statewide as of last year, which was kind of bizarre also. But I have no idea why he would be spending his time there, right? It's not in Detroit, where he's from. And I don't know, being from Dearborn, I've never even heard of anybody really going to that place. So it's a very strange story all the way around. There's actually a former Lashish that's like attached to the same building, like on the other side. It's very East Dearborn. So yeah, it's just kind of a weird. All of it's bizarre in a number of ways, but yeah, it's too bad. I hope that it's something that doesn't totally derail his pro career, although it seems like it probably will.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's been he's been having to fight uphill battles his whole life, basically, and you hope he, can get things turned around for any player. You always hate people come from situations like that who maybe aren't able to escape stuff like that. And it actually continues a string of bad off the field news for former MSU players. Brandon Dawson was arrested for some sort of domestic dispute, but charges were later dropped. And Mateen Cleaves is going through. I don't know the total details on that, but I know he's got something coming up regarding a sexual assault charge. So been a interesting couple of weeks for MSU basketball players off the court, and just I don't know, just a bad look for everybody involved. You hope stuff's not true, and if it is, punishment needs to be dealt out appropriately. But anything else on hoops you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that more than covers it.
All right, so now moving into football and the NFL draft. Well, the spring game was a couple weeks ago. I think after our last podcast, I didn't think there was anything too noteworthy to talk about other than Donnie Corley looked pretty good, and we know the quarterback deal is going to keep going on. So did you have any thoughts on the spring game?
No, not really. It was just kind of nice to be in Spartan Stadium on a nice sunny day. I got pretty badly sunburnt actually, which was kind of a surprise. It was only 50 some degrees outside. But no, other than that, I mean, it was pretty ho-hum. I think that they announced that it was a crowd of 51,000 people. And I can't believe that that's close to true, because I think they were.
I believe the lower bowl is about 50,000. How did it look being there?
Well, the lower bowl was definitely not full, and there weren't any people in the upper deck at all. So it was hard for me to believe that. It seemed to me like there were more people at the spring game last year when they were trying to get to 50,000, and they announced 48, and it was like, well, that's probably high, but okay, Sure,
yeah, I remember when that happened, and I said, why not if you're gonna round it to that, why not just round it to the 50? Maybe that's what because since that was the goal, it seemed weird to round it short, to estimate it short. Maybe they estimated it over this time. I don't know.
Right. Well, that's the thing. If they said 50 on the nose, maybe that seems a little little weird. So maybe, I don't know. It's bizarre. I wonder how they try to count that anyways, or if it's just a total guess, and no one's ever gonna argue with it except for me, apparently. So those are my main thoughts. Other than that, I thought quarterback thing, none of that got resolved in any way. Other than that, I didn't have a lot of takeaways. I don't think that there were any particular standouts. I was pretty happy that the one injury was one where the guy came back. I forgot who that was, but it didn't seem like anybody got injured, so that was a positive.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all. That's pretty much all I got.
I mean, the quarterback wasn't fixed. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that Furman game to open up the season, because then they got a bye, and then they got Notre Dame and Wisconsin and BYU, and things really get going. So, not much else out of spring. But so the draft was last weekend. Shalik Calhoun goes 3rd round to the Raiders. Connor Cook 4th round to the Raiders. Donovan Clark 7th round to the Chargers. Aaron Burbridge 6th round to the Niners. Jack Conklin, 8th overall to the Titans, and a number of guys signed off-field deals, notably Jack Allen with the Saints and Darian Harris with the Bengals. But the big story, and arguably the second biggest story of the draft behind the Laramie Tunsil gas mask, was Connor Cook slipping to the 4th round. And the whole issue of the captaincy, we talked about this for months, and we even decided we weren't even going to talk about it anymore because it was stupid. But clearly, NFL teams had their concerns through various talks with other people, talks with Cook, that he slipped all the way down to a spot where a team that already had a quarterback decided to go up and get him. I have some thoughts, but Joe, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel a hot take storm coming, or at least a
I thought that's what this whole
skewing of something.
podcast. I thought that's what this whole podcast was going to be, but then basketball had to go make some news.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it's one of those things where a guy drafted in the 4th round, a quarterback drafted in the 4th round, is going to get his shot in the NFL unless he, totally bombs in camp or something. It's a high enough draft pick where you're going to get a little bit of a look at the very least. And if it turns out that you're worth more than what that 4th round pick was, then that probably becomes apparent one way or another. So ultimately, the whole thing is extremely silly, and I think you're probably going to talk about why it's so silly here in a moment. But I think the ultimate takeaway is that Cook is going to get his shot at one point or another, and it's not an ideal landing spot for him, but there have been less than ideal landing spots for guys like Brian Hoyer and Kirk Cousins, and those things have worked out to the degree that they possibly could have, really, right? I mean, Hoyer got his shot. Drew Stanton's bounced around, but gotten a pretty decent look in a couple places. So I think it'll work out okay. But
if you're good enough, you'll stick around, and that's what the former MSU quarterbacks have. If he sticks his head down and is able to get the character concerns past him and just kind of stay out of the spotlight, prove his worth in preseason games. Maybe if he gets a shot in regular season games, his trade value will be pretty good in a few years. The Raiders drafted him for the sake of trading him. I mean, really, that's what that pick is. That's what the Kirk Cousins pick was. But it ended up working out in different ways. Okay, so a lot of things here. For one, for the pro Connor Cook people, do not point to his record. Don't 34-5, 35-5, whatever it was. Don't use that. That's way too often being used as a point to prop him up. Quarterback wins. It's a team game. You can't put that on there. However, I do think his big game experience counts. In that sense, I think what he did in the Rose Bowl, what he did in the first Big Ten championship game, what he did in the Cotton Bowl, on the biggest stages, he got the job done. That's more than I can say for Paxton Lynch, Jacoby Brissett, Cody Kessler, Christian Hackenberg, quarterbacks who were 4 quarterbacks drafted ahead of him, which were very odd and interesting. And so right after Paxton Lynch got drafted by the Broncos, which people thought would be a good spot for Cook, Mike Mayock says he was speaking positively about Lynch, but he says he's never been in a huddle. He doesn't know how to call protections. He doesn't control the line of scrimmage. He's never been under center and never done a 5-step drop. That's like a huge part of playing quarterback, other than he's tall and has a good arm, which is Cook has one of those. He's tall enough and he's got a decent arm. So that was strange there. Christian Hackenberg, I guess Brian Cook at MGO blog had maybe the most interesting comment of that. And you got to remember, this is a guy who does not like Michigan State at all. And he said he would even if Connor Cook was caught smoking a bong out of a still bleeding human head, you would have drafted Connor Cook ahead of Christian Hackenberg. And man, I'm just like,
yeah. Brian Cook was always very positive about Connor Cook, which was interesting.
Because he knows Connor Cook single-handedly, in Aaron Burbridge, single-handedly put MSU in the position where a fumble punt was able to get them the win. Cook's overall completion percentage was not good in that game, but the throws that he was making against incredible coverage by Michigan, and that's where the tape is more important than just the numbers. Louis Riddick, ESPN analyst, I was listening to him on a podcast, and he made a good point that at this time of year, so many scouts and analysts get enamored with measurables and numbers, and they stop looking at the film from the fall, which is the most important thing. Connor Cook's overall numbers at Michigan, you look at those, not that great, not a great completion percentage. If you watch that game, if you watch the throws that the ball placement he had against the incredible coverage by Jordan Lewis, not a lot of people can make those throws. And the Indiana game, the Rutgers game, there were a lot of games where Connor Cook single-handedly won them the game this year. They did not have a very good running game, and we know their defense wasn't all that great, especially pass-wise. Connor Cook won them a lot of games this year. I'm not going to say point to his record, but if you put it in the context of what some of those wins are, they're very impressive. He has put a team on his back and led them to victory. Now, the off-field stuff. Okay, wasn't voted a captain. We know. This was a thing back in whatever, August, September, whatever it was. And I think this was I've got negatives about Cook coming up here in a minute. So this is not just all in pro Cook. He was elected to the 12-person leadership council. He was elected 4 times as a captain during the game, and the team had very good leadership, as proven by what they did. I mean, if Connor Cook's teammates hated him, how good would this team been if they loved him? You know, would they have won the Nebraska game and won the national championship? If they hated him as bad as some of the reports said. But back when he wasn't named captain, that was the tipping point that everybody was able to jump back to. And from that point on, I think Cook was always facing an uphill climb against this narrative. You never heard anything about his leadership or about any of that until that moment. And then the first anonymous scout quotes start coming out. He wasn't elected captain. Why wasn't that? I don't know. I'm just saying. And then that just continued for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then eventually people start looking for different things to say, did you see this example? This is why he wasn't voted captain. Archie Griffin. Oh, did you see him pull the thing away? That's a character concern. If Cook was voted a captain, that Archie Griffin thing is not a big deal at all. People were just looking for it. And also, people forget, right after he just kind of pulled it away from Archie Griffin, he immediately said, I don't deserve this award. I want to give it to the offensive line. No, that's leadership in my book. I don't know. I thought right after winning the Big Ten in 2013, he immediately runs off the field right to his family. I think that people were from that point on, people were looking for something to fit this narrative that he didn't have good intangibles. And the intangibles part's weird because I think on the field he has incredible intangibles. He's got great pocket presence. He knows where to put the ball. He's got good vision, all kinds of stuff that are more than just physically throwing the ball. So that was weird. And I found it weird when compared to, say, Christian Hackenberg, who many, many times throughout his career, if you watch any Penn State games, not every game, I said every game on Twitter, and Penn State fans blew up at me, but many times during the game, he's out there yelling at his teammates. He gets sacked, he's yelling at the offensive line, he gets to the sideline, he's yelling at the coaches, he's yelling at his running back. This happened a lot. And then in the draft process, Hackenberg throws his coach under the bus. Says, but based on the report, said he was essentially blaming James Franklin for him not being as good a quarterback as he was his freshman year with Bill O'Brien. Now, whether that's true or not, you don't do that. I mean, you don't throw your coach under the bus when you're talking to another team. That pick was that high was strange. So, and what if MSU had pulled the Penn State 2 years ago. They had 7 captains. If MSU does that, if Cook's a captain, none of this like comes up. That's why I keep going back to people pointed to that thing right when it happened, and then immediately the scrutiny was there, and people were just looking for things to fit that. That said, Charles Davis the other day on Dan Patrick's show says before day 3, he talked to 3 different personnel people, asked him why Connor Cook. And in short, they said their interactions with him were lousy. Now, that's on Cook. Now, there were reports of his interviews going poorly. Now, I being not voted a captain is one thing. But not performing well in your team interviews when you know that people are questioning your character, to not be prepared for that, to not put on your best face for that, that's on Cook. That's surprising. That's maybe on Cook's agents and representation for not properly preparing him for that, because you knew that was going to be, the biggest thing. And although apparently Jay Glazer said, Fox Sports' Jay Glazer said that Cook like hand wrote letters to a bunch of teams that he met, and half of the teams thought it was nice, and other half thought it was him sucking up. Which, if they think that, then you have no chance of ever changing anybody's mind if you're going to do something nice. And so that just kind of goes to show what he was facing, and I honestly think it was more than his character. It has to be. Even if he is a complete dick and a complete tool, it has to be more than that. We haven't seen him with his shoulder fully healthy since he got hurt against Maryland. Iowa and Alabama, he was not 100%. We have not seen him in a game since then. If there were reports, if there were analysts saying I talked to teams, they're not so sure about his shoulder yet. He already didn't have a ton of velocity on the ball. He hasn't shown to have that fire back. Okay, I get that. If you don't think he was that good, I get that. But the point hammered over and over and over throughout the draft was the character, the leadership thing, which I think was a bit lazy and a bit missing the point. And I got some more things, but Joe, I said a lot there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get it all right there. The point about Hackenberg openly feuding with his coaching staff and getting drafted ahead of a player who clearly outperformed him is pretty interesting. There's a lot that's interesting about the draft in general and in relation to Cook as well. I mean, it's interesting to me that a team which won the Big Ten and got to the college football playoff had just 1 first-round pick, had just 2 picks in the first 3 rounds, and had just 3 picks in the first 4 rounds, right? I mean, that's it seems like that either means Mark D'Antonio is making really a lot out of very little, which I don't think is true at this point, or that some of these players were underdrafted, and I think that that's probably more likely to be true. It is amazing to me that a guy like Jack Allen doesn't get drafted, but I also think that there must be some overall concern about draftability of some of these MSU players, right? I mean, Conklin gets drafted 8th overall, but then to have nobody go in the 2nd round, to have just Shalik Calhoun go in the 3rd round, and then just Cook go in the 4th round, to me is pretty wild. It makes me wonder, too, if we've seen a pendulum swing in the NFL draft away from college production, where, and I think that's something that you were sort of mentioning as well, back towards sort of a measurables type thing.
Right.
It's amazing to me, whenever I turned on ESPN and was looking at stuff about the draft, hand size is extremely important, apparently. I've never totally understood why that is all of a sudden such a major concern. I've never seen any like empirical analysis that charted hand size versus NFL production or anything like that. I mean, it's it's weird. I don't get much of that. The other piece I think you brought up that is a little bit underrated is just that Cook was playing in a pro style offense where he had a lot of control over audibles and making changes on the fly. He also led the best MSU offense of all time in 2014, right?
Mm-hmm.
2015 offense definitely took a step back, but it's another piece. And then the last thing is sort of with Cook, at least, is he's a quarterback who clearly knows when and where to pick his spots in games. He, in 2013, early on in the season, was very obviously not where he ended up getting to at the end of his junior year and then into his senior year. But he did a good job of, for the most part, making good decisions. He got lucky a little bit in 2013. There were a couple dropped interceptions or what have you, but he was absolutely terrific all season in 2014, and then for much of 2015 up until that shoulder injury. And then even then, he, I thought, did a pretty good job of picking his spots against Iowa, leading that final drive against Iowa, putting his shoulder down to get the 4th down pickup. I mean, it just seems to me like a guy that was being supported by his teammates on Twitter during the draft and even before the draft and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, look.
Is odd. It's all just very weird.
Oh, you mentioned that 4th down. Look at the quarterback lowering his shoulder on a 4th down to win the Big Ten championship. You cannot tell me that he doesn't care about winning, doesn't care about the game, cares more about the lifestyle. When with a bum-ass shoulder, putting his future on the line, he's willing to do stuff like that. And people, a lot of analysts kept saying if he's hit his ceiling, and which is weird because if he had been in a Baylor type of offense, I don't think you'd be hearing that. It's weird how there's the benefit of he's been in a pro style, he knows how to call audibles, he knows how to do this, he does this. But then technically you're checking off more boxes that you've almost checked off all your boxes, and then you feel like he's reached this ceiling. He got better every single year at MSU, and his numbers might have been better in 2014. But if you look at the tape and if you look at the context, he single-handedly won MSU several games last year. He got that team to the playoff. Also, thanks to a lucky bounce against Michigan and the craziest, weirdest game against Ohio State where he didn't play. But he put the team in position to compete for a playoff single-handedly because he did not have a running game. He had Aaron Burbridge, but that was generally it in the receiving game, and the defense was poor in the back end. And about the accuracy number deal, ESPN says he was the 4th most inaccurate quarterback on throws of 10 yards or less. But Pro Football Focus said he had the best accuracy percentage versus tight coverage in terms of ball placement. Basically, he was very good at throwing the ball down the field. He was not very good at throwing the dump-offs and shorter passes. Couple reasons. One, MSU's offensive style does not help high completion percentages. There are not a lot of quick tight end outs, running back swinging passes, bubble screens like they used to run with Kirk Cousins. They didn't run those with Connor Cook very much at all. Now he might not be very good at them, but he was not asked to make throws that were high percentage throws in the first place. We talked about his go-to throw was the back shoulder fade. That's a low percentage throw that he did pretty well on. And that's why I think, depending on how you look at these stats, it's simply more than just the completion percentage. It's about the context of the throws he was making. Look at those back shoulder throws that he made to Aaron Burbridge every single week and tell me how many quarterbacks can make those throws. It's not many throws.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other, those stats that you just quoted from ESPN and from Pro Football Focus line up exactly with my own personal vision of what Connor Cook
they match the
was all about. Yeah, and what's interesting about some of that is it's hard for me to figure out exactly why that was the case, why Cook excelled so much at some of those throws downfield, but struggled so much with some of those short ones. I couldn't figure out. He was definitely inconsistent at times
Right.
with his footwork, and that's
what it was.
kind of persisted over time.
Right.
So I mean, and that's a legitimate, criticism.
Right.
He's
I said for months.
inconsistent.
Yeah, I said for months that there are legitimate questions about him as an NFL quarterback, but I thought the captaincy thing was bullshit the whole time. And you could talk about his accuracy, and it stems from his footwork. And that's been a point for 3 years, so much so that Ed Cunningham beat it into the ground and upset a bunch of MSU fans because he kept talking about it during one of those games that he called. But it is an issue, and that's why he was not as good at the short throws, is because he relied straight on his arm. But when he had to throw the ball downfield and couldn't just use his arm, and he had to have his feet set, he generally made those throws. And that's what he has to do consistently. I said all along, I don't know if he can be your franchise quarterback, although as the season went along, I shifted a little bit more towards that based on how he was carrying the team. But it's when you see nothing but the character talked about, and you see the quarterbacks who are drafted ahead of him, Hackenberg, whose numbers are far worse than Connor Cook's, whose accuracy is worse than Connor Cook's. You look at Cody Kessler, who can barely throw the ball farther than 20 yards and is tiny. Although he went to the Patriots, and Patriots know what they're talking about. And then, no, I'm sorry. Kessler went to the Browns. Hugh Jackson knows what he's talking about. And then Jacoby Brissett from NC State. How many what big games, what big throws did he really have to make? How much pressure was he under, like a guy like Cook had to deal with? That's why it was so strange. If they had talked about, the only on-field stuff they would talk about with Cook was the completion percentage. They would, that's it. They wouldn't say why he was inaccurate. They wouldn't say he had the best accuracy percentage versus tight coverage. Oh, why is he terrible on the short throws? Why is he good on the deeper throws? Like, look at the numbers. There has to be a reason for this, and it stems from that footwork. Like, some of the analysis of him was just really, I just felt just lazy. And like, there's reasons for this. They say, oh, his completion, the character, he wasn't voted captain. Teammates didn't like him. Oh, and his completion percentage wasn't very good. And like, that was it. Can he throw the ball? Is his shoulder healthy? No one was talking about that. That's a question I have. That's a legitimate question. If those were the questions that were being asked when he was sliding, I would totally understand it. The fact that the people and the analysts were citing people they were talking to. They weren't pulling it out of their asses. They were saying the people I talked to, they keep saying, the character concerns, the captaincy thing. If that was solely the reason that put him behind Hackenberg, Jacoby Brissett, Cody Kessler, it was mind-boggling to me. Now, again, if Cook's interviews were really as bad as the team said they were, that's on him. That's inexcusable, and that would say something about him, considering what's going on ahead of time. It comes back to his team of people, and did they put him in the best position to succeed in this draft? I know Mark D'Antonio was really pissed off about that Detroit News article after the fact that included more people bashing Cook for the same reasons. It didn't have. My issue with that story is that it didn't have any new information. We were just reprinting the same stuff we've been printing for months. It just seemed kind of piling on after the fact. There was no real purpose to it other than repeating things that already said. But D'Antonio got pissed off about it. And, maybe D'Antonio should have gotten pissed off about it months ago. And I'm sure D'Antonio said good things about Cook in his meetings with teams. But if it was this such of a big a deal, maybe D'Antonio didn't realize it. But maybe he could have gone to bat harder for his guy throughout the year. But I don't think he thought that was going to derail him that much. I don't think. We didn't think it was going to derail him that much. I'm sure his teammates didn't. I'm sure if his teammates knew what was going to happen, he would have been voted captain. And I feel like I can almost guarantee senior quarterback Tyler O'Connor is going to be captain this time around, because there's going to be a whole lot of attention on that vote and the fact that the senior quarterback didn't get the vote. So, and is Connor Cook cocky by all accounts? Yeah, but that's generally what people say they want in their quarterbacks. Look at Aaron Rodgers. Now, Aaron Rodgers is obviously a lot more accomplished, but relative to college football, Connor Cook had accomplished quite a lot. And the other big thing, the other big thing, all these concerns about the character, no one could point to any one instance. He was never arrested. There were never all these photos coming out on social media of him crazy drunk, passed out, puking, or doing something like that. There was none of that. There's nothing about him out at clubs doing this and that and this and that. Like Johnny Manziel going in, like we knew all these things about Johnny Manziel going into the draft. What's happened afterward has not been a surprise to anybody. That's why it was so weird for Cook to be perceived in this light when even in quotes from anonymous people, they wouldn't say, they couldn't point to anyone. And since they just kind of got rubbed the wrong way, which, maybe you do, but for him, and so he falls. And I just refuse to believe that was the sole reason he fell all the way to where he didn't. He maybe would have fallen farther. The Raiders traded up to get him because they thought he was enough value to be a trade chip. So I don't know.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. It's just it's a bizarre.
It was so
case.
Odd. Like there's always some stories, and there were not a lot of stories in this draft until the Laremy Tunsil thing happened. Seemed like it was gonna be kind of a boring draft. There wasn't a Johnny Manziel where you're gonna watch to see where he goes. Connor Cook ended up turning into that, and when it happened, people went back to the same old stuff. Overall, yeah. I think Cook was put in a difficult situation from the beginning. Performed very well on the field. Was never able to overcome the narrative about him, and it appears part of that was his own fault, based on what teams were saying about his meetings. Say he's not that good. Say you're worried about his shoulder. There were a lot of concerns about Cook, but for the captaincy thing to be this huge weight on him for months just seemed lazy more than anything else. And that and his own interactions with teams cost him millions of dollars. And now he's going to have to work to get that back. We talked about it. Put your head down. He puts his head down, stays out of any sort of trouble, just is a solid backup quarterback. He'll be a valuable trade piece in a team that is looking for take a chance on a guy may. But for now, he's going to kind of fade to the background for a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and there's just some other oddities in this draft from an MSU perspective as well. The fact that Donovan Clark got drafted, but Jack Allen did not is interesting. I mean, I understand the reasoning for it, that Clark's got the long arms and is a little taller, but it's if for Jack Allen to not get drafted at all says to me that there has to be some overemphasis on measurables and underemphasis on college production. I just can't imagine how that would be, how there could be any other reasoning for that. He's just clearly an all Big Ten player for.
He was All-American twice.
Yeah, All-American player multiple times, right? I mean, playing not in a bad league. It's not like the Big Ten is a bad league to be an All-American.
I remember a game they pointed out. Allen, I think, was given the ability by the coaches to call out blitzes that he saw, and the analyst said that centers never get that responsibility. Very smart player, and he was a captain too.
Right, and somehow that didn't help his draft stock, though.
You mentioned, a college football playoff team not getting many high drafted players, and when it comes to MSU, part of that is when you not under recruit, but when you recruit under the radar guys and overperform, a big reason those guys are under the radar is because they don't have the measurables that you look for in certain positions. Aaron Burbridge is kind of small, maybe not the fastest. Jack Allen, short arms. But Shalik Calhoun, even though there were concerns about his running ability, he's tall. He's got the body for it. Donovan Clark, a guy who we would have never thought a couple years ago would have been drafted, ends up getting drafted because he's good size and he can play multiple positions. Now, Jack Allen can play multiple positions. He played freaking left tackle this year and fullback, which is insane because he's a center who's not supposed to be able to move his feet very well. And so you look at other schools who maybe get the guys who one that comes to mind whenever I think about this topic is William Campbell out of Michigan, who was a 5-star recruit who didn't do much of anything in college. He played both sides of the ball, didn't do much of anything, ends up getting drafted because he had the size and the build that the NFL likes. And I don't know if he's still in the NFL, but he at least stayed in the NFL for a while. So, I mean, that's kind of where it comes into play. B.J. Cunningham breaks all the records. Oh, yeah, William Campbell he was on the Packers last year. B.J. Cunningham breaks the record for MSU catches, seems like a sure-handed guy, but he wasn't quite fast enough. And he was a bit small, and he did not last. He barely had a cup of coffee in the NFL. And that's where, MSU has the players to succeed in college that maybe don't always succeed in the NFL because of the physical limitations. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, D'Antonio's job is to get players, graduate them. He gets the best out of everybody, and if that ends up in the NFL, then it does. But Jack Conklin, how does a guy go from a 0-star to a first-round pick? Because he had a big growth spurt after his senior year, and I wrote about it when they got the walk-on commitment from him. I said he needs to add on to pounds, but he's tall enough, and if you can fill out that body, it'll work. And that's what I think MSU has looked for in some guys like Demetrius Cooper, defensive end who just need to put on some weight, but he's got the body there. And so that's what the coaches always, that's part of recruiting. You try to see the guys you can get the most out of, and the guys who have the bigger bodies draw more eyes to them, so it's harder for them to get overlooked.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing that I've seen just in general, is it seems like it's hard for folks who make decisions in front offices to forget some of the previous information, even if that information isn't useful anymore, right? So guys like the perfect example of this, it's actually sort of the worst example of this, is Chauncey Billups. He was, a top 5 pick when he came out of college, didn't perform very well in the NBA, and then the Pistons picked him up for a lot less than he was worth, and he turns into NBA Finals champion. The basic idea being, right, that if there was some reason why folks thought that a particular player was going to be good, those reasons still hold for one reason or another. So it's interesting because I think that in the vast majority of cases, that's a faulty line of logic where, you say, oh, well, that guy was a 5-star recruit. Well, okay, he was a 5-star recruit, but you have new and better information than you did when he was getting recruited out of high school. So in some cases, right, William Campbell is a decent one. That actually turns out to be decently true. He's got some of the characteristics required to be an NFL player. But in the vast majority of cases, right, guys like, oh boy, I'm blanking. I mean, guys that you just don't think about. I think that there's a much larger number of guys who are very highly rated recruits for various reasons. Fred Smith, the wide receiver, is a great example. Very highly rated wide receiver, was the highest rated player in an MSU class, ended up getting converted to fullback, and I don't think even played fullback very much. There's, for every one William Campbell, there's 5 4-stars that turn out not to be particularly
Sure.
great players.
I don't. I don't mean just because the guy's highly recruited. I just mean when the guy has the body, even if he doesn't have the production, if he has the physical attributes, that will give him very often the benefit of the doubt.
Right, and then the other piece of it to me also seems to be the opportunity in general. It was a really interesting podcast with Bill Simmons and Draymond Green that I listened to a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, me too. That was a good.
Where Draymond Green even admits readily that had he not gotten drafted by the Golden State Warriors and gotten the opportunity to play with Steph Curry, he may or may not be in the league at all, right? And he's now a max contract player. So it makes you wonder, depending on where guys end up and the type of opportunity that they get, their result set could be wildly different. A guy like BJ Cunningham got drafted by the Dolphins, I believe, in a very late round. I think it was a 6th or 7th round draft pick. It's very hard for me to believe that BJ Cunningham didn't have some potential as an NFL player. It seems more likely to me that he just didn't get.
He did battle some injuries too.
And yeah, right. So I mean, to me, it seems like that was more of an opportunity issue than an ability issue. If a guy like Blair White was able to play some meaningful time, or Benny Fowler or Keith Mumphrey, it's just hard for me to believe that BJ Cunningham didn't have that ability. But
Fowler's
in any case, it's it's just getting placed in the right place at the right time,
right,
with the right people around you.
That's what it is, and that's what teams need to. That's what teams should be drafting for. Instead of getting enamored with the guy's measurables, you look at a guy and say, does he fit what we want to do? That's more important than anything. That when teams put their draft boards together, that's what they have to keep in mind. That's what they have to order. You may have a different guy over. Everybody may think this guy's the best guy at this position, but maybe he doesn't fit what you want, what you try to run. So this other guy's better, and that's what's the most important thing. Draymond Green's a perfect example. When he was possibly looking at other teams, I didn't think he should leave because I thought he should take less money and stay with the Golden State Warriors because they were the ones who were best positioned to maximize his potential, and they have. And he's gotten a ton of money, and he's set. And if he wants to take a max contract, get more money somewhere else, and be the guy, then that's more power to him. But Louis Riddick again had a good comment on a podcast saying organizations ruin players as much as players ruin themselves, meaning they don't put those players in the best position to succeed. And they think, he says, if a guy's a bust, don't just look at the player and figure out why he's a bust. Look at the team, figure out why it didn't work. He said, if Jared Goff and Carson Wentz don't work out with the Rams and Eagles, then we better look at the Eagles and Rams with a fine-tooth comb up and down that organization to figure out why they didn't work. Because when players have the tools to succeed, they should. And if they don't, that's on the organization too. So a lot of guys, and that's where Jack Allen, speaking to him, it was probably better for him to go undrafted than be a 7th-round pick in general, because then those players can pick what their best available options are. And he went with the Saints, whose offensive line is coached by Dan Ruschar. So Jack Allen's going to have an advantage when he goes in there because he's going to know what Dan Ruschar wants out of his offensive lineman and how he wants them to play. So it'll be interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks around. I think it'd be disappointing if he doesn't. So yeah, it's about the right fit.
Yeah, it's Jack Allen is an interesting case that I'll be interested to watch as it goes along, because he, even despite whatever physical limitations he might have had, was specifically able to play even right off the bat. I mean, he was a starter as a redshirt freshman. So it seems like one of those situations where it's too much stock being put into measurables.
I did wonder. My last comment on Jack. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I did wonder if there were injury concerns with him too, because he did have to battle some things. And you mentioned Blair White. I talked to him after he didn't get drafted in 2010 draft, I think, or maybe that whatever year it was. And he said a big reason the Colts he wasn't drafted was because he had back surgery like in his first year at MSU or like after high school or something like that. And it was such a concern for teams that it was a big reason he went undrafted because of an injury from that long ago. So that was another thing I worried about with Jack Allen. Or with any offensive lineman, you never know truly what types of ailments they have to deal with publicly. So I did wonder if that played any sort of effect into Allen. I don't know. It was just something I wondered when he went undrafted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another point about Cook too, right? That it's very difficult to know what the status of his shoulder was. Didn't seem like a lot of information came out while he was still at MSU for a number of reasons. Mostly because MSU still had more games to play at a number of points. So, yeah, think back to the MSU Penn State game at the very end of the regular season in 2015. Where Aaron Burbridge makes this amazing catch and then double spin move into an end zone. Jack Allen runs the ball in for a touchdown. Connor Cook looks pretty good. They score 50-plus points. And then Christian Hackenberg is taken in the third round. It's just an amazing situation. I struggle to believe that one of those players is better than some of the others.
Well, yeah, the Hackenberg one. He has all the physical ability in the world, and you saw it his freshman year. But man, when he was bad, he was bad, and he may have his confidence may have completely been shot by playing behind a turnstile of an offensive line there because of the scholarship reductions. But that's where I talk about when it comes back to Connor Cook's ceiling, it was almost as if the fact that he had succeeded, he had been put in a position to succeed and had succeeded, that it was almost in some ways viewed as a negative because we'd seen everything he could do. The fact that Hackenberg may have sucked, but he wasn't in the best situation, so let's give him a pass on that. It was weird because you're usually not going to have the best situation with whatever NFL team you're on either. So, it may have been only the Jets. It may have been only the Jets who had Hackenberg that high, but Roger Sherman from SB Nation, he had a tweet here. Let me look it up here. It was about Cook, and he says, my scouting report on Christian Hackenberg: strengths, tall, looks like a QB. Weaknesses, throwing footballs, pocket awareness, playing quarterback. and Penn State fans got super upset at him over that. And he was saying, like, he never thinks a player is going to fail. You never know, but Hackenberg looked very good under the first year, but if you're not with a great quarterbacks coach in Bill O'Brien, who got to the playoffs with Brian Hoyer and TJ Yates and a bunch of other guys, can you succeed? And Hackenberg's lack of success on film relative to Cook, along with, like I said, yelling at his teammates frequently and throwing his coaches under the bus, seemed very just juxtapose that with what was said about Cook was very, very strange. And I honestly think either teams got completely swept up in the narrative and looked for reasons to match that narrative, or and Cook played into that, or something's wrong with his shoulder. Again, I really, really don't think it was just that. I don't want to start repeating myself, but it was just some of the guys picked ahead of him was just very, very surprising. And I'm not saying Cook's going to be a great quarterback. I've said I don't know if he is, but some of those other guys I don't think at all. So,
right. Yeah, I agree with you. It was a weird set of events that led to this this Connor Cook dropping into the fourth round, and I wonder if he had left after his junior year, if where he would have gone.
Oh yeah,
Right?
he would have been drafted higher. Last year's quarterback class was not good. I remember seeing that. Let me pull it.
But to
Keep
be
going.
fair, are we sure that this year's quarterback class was very good? I mean,
I mean,
like Goff is probably good, right? I am pretty confident that Goff will be, or at least has the tools to be, a solid NFL quarterback. But Wentz, I mean, that's just a very difficult one to figure because he was playing at a level where there's just a lot more uncertainty, I would think,
right.
about where
And
those guys end up.
it's always hard to judge with those guys. And people make the Joe Flacco comparison, but the thing with Flacco is that he transferred to Delaware from Pitt. He was an FBS quarterback. He beforehand. Okay, so 2015 draft, Winston Mariota go 1 and 2. But other than that, Garrett Grayson from Colorado State in the third round, Sean Mannion from Oregon State in the third round, Bryce Petty from Baylor in the fourth round, Brett Hundley from UCLA in the fifth round, and Trevor Siemian from Northwestern in the seventh round. And I do believe Cook would have, because frankly, the captain thing wouldn't have come up. It would not have come up. You would not have had people. Obviously, you're looking for his character, and maybe people say, "Oh, he comes off as cocky or immature," and you say, "Okay, well, he wasn't a senior," and yeah, I think it did stem from this captaincy thing. Part of the reason he slid, also the fact that he got hurt his senior year, is another factor playing into it. But if he had come out last year, yeah, I think he would have been drafted higher.
Yeah, I would think he wouldn't have been in the top two. He wouldn't have been with
No.
Winston and Mariota, but he probably would have been a late first round or second round pick. Have been my guess. So,
I mean,
well.
right. It depends on. I mean, if the Saints went Garrett Grayson in the third round, if that, I mean, maybe no one else really thought much of the other quarterbacks. So, yeah, I mean, I think he missed out by comeback, but that's another thing, is that considering him, he could have come out last year and probably been a pretty high pick. He knew that. I mean, does that not say something about what he thinks of his teammates? To be willing to come back and want to win a Big Ten championship, want to accomplish more, yada yada yada, because he could have been a Big Ten, he could have been a decent pick last year. I just think there are plenty of examples. I'm not saying he's the nicest guy in the world. By many accounts, he comes off as very, very cocky. But for a guy who has never been arrested, never had bad social media pictures of him shared around, and for a guy with what he's accomplished on the field, I've never seen a player like that slide down so much in the draft because of off-field concerns that nobody could define. And that's the part that and Tunsil is the legacy of this draft. That's what people are going to remember from this draft, because there was not much otherwise. It's going to be Tunsil gas mask during the draft, and then what the hell happened to Connor Cook sliding so far? And that's it. And now he's facing this, and he'll have to fight back against it for a while in the NFL, and we'll see if he can, because he did during the season with MSU, but then meeting teams he apparently didn't in terms of their conversations with them. So maybe this will humble him to the point. I know his dad fired off a tweet at some NFL draft analyst, pissed off at them. So I don't know, but him and Shalik Calhoun will be with the Raiders, and it'll be interesting to see where he is in a few years, because it's an interesting it'll be a fascinating study. It's a fascinating study into the draft process, that's for sure.
Yeah, I got nothing more on this one.
All right. Anything else you wanted to hit in this podcast?
No, I think we covered it. I'm amazed that we had an hour's worth of podcast to record.
Yeah, I figured we would on this one, because there was a good amount to talk about. But so, not sure when we'll do this again. Generally, every few weeks. Kind of need to wait for some stuff to happen, unless you want us to ramble about nothing and Joe's interactions with Blake O'Neill as his roommate. But other than that, you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Vanini. He's at JOBIN, number 2, letter E. Also at The Only Colors, which is now under the management of Dom Garrett, who's getting a lot of content up there, so make sure you're always checking that out. And thanks, guys, for listening, and we will talk to you later. See ya.
See ya.